In November 1990, Andrei Chikatilo, the USSR's worst killer, was detained. His name is known all over the world. It causes fear and is firmly associated with dozens of monstrous murders. To this day, movies and TV series are made about him, and his fanatical followers compete in the number of victims. The theory of everything. The future killer was born in October 36 in Ukraine, in the Kharkov region. Allegedly, the boy had congenital hydrocephalus, a brain disease that causes headaches and impaired vision. In addition, Chikatilo was allegedly beaten by his mother for having urinary incontinence. When the Great Patriotic War began, the boy's father went to the front. At this time, the village in which Andrei stayed with his mother was captured by the Germans. As if then, Chikatilo witnessed brutal shootings, shot and on fleeing children. According to legend, then Andrew slipped and hit his head on a rock and woke up lying in a pit among dead bodies. During the war, Andrei's mother gave birth to a baby girl, allegedly after being raped. The child's father was rumored to be a German soldier, but there is no evidence that Chikatilo had a brother. Probably, the children were simply frightened so that they did not go out on the street. The future maniac said that when he was 14 years old, a neighbor tried to rape him. This stress he will remember for a long time. And already in the army, Chikatilo still raped, but already a co-worker. But still, when Andrei returned to his native village after demobilization, girls found him attractive. But at the very last moment, Chikatilo couldn't do anything. I told him, he said yes, we had already planned it. But he said he was unfit as a man. And that's all. They explained throughout the village that he was unfit, an invalid and all that. I ran away from the village in shame. Only Andrei's future wife managed to control him. In marriage they had no passion, but they still managed to have 2 children. For her, he was a faithful, calm and hard-working husband. Allegedly, he couldn't even cut up a chicken because it was pitiful. But at what point did he begin to turn into a real monster? Chikatilo's deviations first became apparent during his work at a boarding school. He would sit down with schoolgirls in order to explain complex topics to them, while stroking and hugging them. With one, he even locked himself in the classroom. But after Andrei Romanovich took his pupils for a swim, his career as a teacher came to a swift end. Then one of the girls allegedly swam far away. Chikatilo noticed the teenager who had broken away from the group, swam up to her and began to indecently grab her. The girl was greatly frightened and began to break free. At this point, the maniac experienced arousal. Of course, Andrei Romanovich was forced to write a statement as soon as the case became known. Already soon, Chikatilo took the family to the town of Mines in the Rostov region, where he found a new job, a supply clerk. It required frequent business trips. This would give the maniac the opportunity to kill people in different regions of the USSR, which would complicate his search. In December 78, information about the disappearance of second grader Yelena Zakotnova traveled from the mine. 2 days later, she would be found raped and strangled in the Grushevka River. Investigators quickly detained a certain Alexander Kravchenko. The suspect had previously been convicted of rape, so the suspicion fell on him. Chikatilo was also suspected of the murder, but they could not prove his involvement. There was no hard evidence. At the same time, Kravchenko was shot, and the case of the murder of Elena Zakotnova later raised a discussion about the need for the death penalty. This murder was the first in a series of massacres of minors and women of easy behavior. At the time, the media was silent. In the USSR, they simply could not tell that a brutal maniac was at work in the country. Therefore, many girls did not even suspect what danger they might face. The maniac looked for his victims at bus stops or train stations. After that, he offered to show the way or watch a movie on a VCR in a private house. Gullible victims voluntarily went to an agonizing death. Chikatilo killed girls near trails where people often walked. According to him, it was as if he was guarded by spirits. He himself could hear people passing by, but they could not hear him. The investigators believed that a mentally ill person should kill with such cruelty. Detentions of the mentally ill began. The locals called the police actions a case of fools. Then they managed to detain several insane people who confessed to the murders. But this did not stop the wave of crimes. All these detentions and unfair sentences only distanced the investigation from the main goal, the capture of the real maniac Chikatilo. In addition, the police were hampered by the lack of hard evidence. Only once the maniac aroused the suspicions of the law enforcers. They noticed a strange man who molested girls near the bus station, not far from the park. And after watching him for a while, it was found out that he often changes transportation, sleeps at the station, and in addition has connections with girls of easy behavior. It would seem that everything came together, and it is necessary to take a potential killer. In the morning, Chikatilo was indeed detained. In his suitcase were found a knife, rope, and Vaseline, but not so. Andrei Romanovich explained that he tied boxes with rope, cut bread with a knife, and used Vaseline after shaving. Blood was taken from the maniac, but experts mistakenly believed that it should be of the fourth group. Chikatilo had the second. The maniac was released and the murders resumed. Serious search for the pervert began only when the number of victims exceeded 10 million. Soviet rubles were allocated for his search. Helicopters were launched into the sky, and the police were assisted in their search on the ground by vigilantes. Among them was Chikatilo himself, who helped to search for himself in order to avoid suspicion, and at the same time to understand the scope of the search. During the time the operation was underway, more than 1,000 crimes were solved, but still could not catch the maniac. In 1986, there was not a single murder similar in handwriting, but a year later, outside the Rostov region began to appear new victims. Then the investigators knew that the criminal must move on electric trains, buses and trains. In the cars and at the stations were on duty in plainclothes pretty policewomen, but they were unaware that such a type does not attract Chikatilo. He was interested in underage boys and girls and easily accessible vagrants. In an attempt to find out the psychological profile of the killer, the operatives turned to psychiatrist Alexander Bukhanovsky. He described the maniac as a calm and judicious family man, heterosexual and impotent. He explained his conclusions by the fact that the maniac used a blade as a sexual organ and collected intimate parts of the victims' bodies as trophies. In November 90, the last murder took place, after which Chikatilo, as before, went to the platform to leave. Usually he managed to get lost among other people, but not this time. His raincoat with sticking leaves and his suitcase gave him away as not at all an avid mushroom picker. Meanwhile, the policeman asked the maniac to show his passport. After 10 days, he was already under surveillance. Then it was discovered that Chikatilo was constantly trying to get acquainted with boys and girls. And after one of the unsuccessful cases, he almost threw himself under the wheels of a car. On November 20th, the killer left work early to go to the emergency room because of a sore finger. It had been bitten by a 16-year-old boy. When Chikatilo learned that he had a fracture, he went to the store in upset feelings for beer, which he poured into a 3-liter can. He was picked up by the police on the way out of the store. At first, the criminal denied everything and did not talk to the investigators. The police still had no direct evidence of guilt. Then psychiatrist Alexander Bukhanovsky again came to the aid of law enforcers. For 3 hours of conversation, he pulled out of Chikatilo a heartfelt confession, handwritten by him in a notebook. The well-to-do, neat-looking man confessed to 50 murders, but their exact number is still unknown. While Chikatilo was on trial, he, and in every possible way, made a madman of himself, crooked, pretended to be sick, and took off his pants in front of everyone. The relatives of the victims present in the hall tried to inflict the brutal killer, threw objects at him, yelled at him, and even wanted to break through the cages to destroy the maniac with their own hands. Given the heinous atrocity he was committing, the subject colleague can't help but give him the only punishment he deserves, exclusively the first punishment. On February 13th, after sentencing, Chikatilo was told that he would be taken for examination. In fact, the maniac went to his execution. In the years since Chikatilo's execution, he has developed a monstrous following. In Moscow and Angarsk in the Irkutsk region, Alexander Pichushkin and Mikhail Popkov, the worst killers after Chikatilo, were engaged in brutal murders. Pichushkin tried to make the number of murders according to the number of squares on a chessboard. Out of 64 today managed to prove only 49. Mikhail Popkov surpassed Chikatilo at least twice. Both maniacs are imprisoned for life. The identity of Chikatilo is still controversial. Some believe that he was mentally ill and should have been treated. Others believe that the death penalty is not a cruel enough punishment for such monsters. What do you think? How should maniacs be punished? What would help catch Chikatilo faster? Like, subscribe, and press the bell.